So
Amen.
please listen to the words that I'm saying, not what I'm not saying. And what we'll try and do is stay as true to the inspired text as possible. Meaning, I'm not going to try to add too far, or I don't want to take away from what it's saying. And I think if we can remove all our past ideas about the way that we've been taught about how the world begins. And I think actually, every time we read the Bible, we should probably take our past ideas and our past conceptions away. And maybe not every single time. There are times that we're looking for specific answers to specific problems. But a lot of times, if we're going to the Bible to look to learn, especially if it's for change, we need to become like a blank canvas and allow the words to be imprinted on us instead of trying to formulate the canvas to fit into the words. Just make the canvas blank and allow God to write it in our minds and in our hearts. So that being said, let's move forward. Because of the topic, because of the nature of what we're going to discuss, I didn't want to, I wanted to use, like I want to say as little as my words as possible. And I wanted to kind of put it in a story way where we could all follow along and see what inspiration says. So at the end of the day, you'll at least be able to write down every location of all the things we're talking about, so you can go further research things and look at them in the full context if you feel as led to. And that way I don't want to say like defend myself, but I don't want people to say, well, hey, Jerry says this or Isaac said that, versus, hey, did you know in this chapter, in this book, it says this here? Or did you know that in Genesis it actually words this, or in the Hebrew this means that? You know what I mean? That way you're not standing on me, but on what has already been given in inspiration. So, that being said, let us start. Creation and the sanctuary. Before the creation of man, angels were in existence. For when the foundations of the earth were laid, the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouted for joy. After the fall of man, angels were sent to guard the tree of life, and this before a human being had died. Angels are in nature superior to men, for the psalmist says that man was made a little lower than the angels. And so here with this first statement, I wanted to start this before creation. And there's a lot of different texts and even things in the Bible. I shouldn't say a lot, but there's a few places where you can look in the Bible and in inspired writings to see things that happened before creation. But what I wanted us to understand here, if we're going back to the beginning, this is before creation of man. It says that angels already existed, so they had to exist somewhere. And it says at this time, the foundations of the earth were laid, which I think is really interesting. This is the foundations, obviously, where God then later built on when he made the earth in those 7 days. There's water already there, and then he divided the waters and brought dry land forth. So there was already substances or already things that were present before he came to do the actual work of creation that we read in Genesis. So that's why I wanted to start here, looking back at this statement where it says the foundations of the world were laid. Notice also that it says that it's the Son of God that was the one that laid the foundations down. So we're there before creation now. Now it says the work of Christ as man's intercessor presented in that beautiful prophecy in Zechariah concerning him whose name is the branch. Says the prophet, he shall build the temple of the Lord, and he shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule upon his, the Father's, throne. And he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both. And that's Zechariah 6:13, and that comes from Great Controversy 1888, 415.3. Excuse me, the first quote also came from Great Controversy 88, 511.2. But in this one it says that he is going to build the temple of the Lord. Why is that significant? Well, looking back in creation again, we know that the Bible talks about the sanctuary as being the temple that's built without hands, meaning that it wasn't man that built that temple, it was the Lord that built that temple. And so we see here that this is saying that Christ is the one that built the temple, and he's going to do all these different things. Before then, it says that Christ is also the one that laid the foundations of the earth together. So Christ built the temple, Christ built the foundation. There at this point there's no earth yet in the story. We're before the creation of the earth. We're still at the foundations. So there's another aspect of heaven that I think we need to understand. I'll just start this. It says the very angels who, when Satan was seeking the supremacy, fought the battle in the heavenly courts and triumphed on the side of God. So in heaven, we understand that God is the ruler or the leader, right? He's the king, but he's also the one that's worshipped. So kind of like what Rome is trying to accomplish on earth with a religious power and a political power, what Rome is trying to do is replicate how heaven is operated or how heaven is ran, right? With one at the top, one as a leader, and things are delegated downwards. And that's how heaven is ran. And so God is the object of our worship, right? In the religious aspect of heavenly society. But God is also the kingly leader. So there is a political aspect to heaven in the sense of policies and rules and government, and there is a religious aspect to heaven in the sense of ritual and worship and so forth. Does that make sense? Is that clearly understood? And you guys can interact by all means, please. I'm going to say some things that's going to cause you to have to say something anyway, so please get used to speaking to me now.
Yeah. Now that I think about how Rome operates, the emperor was worshipped, and the emperor in heaven would be like God, but the emperor in Rome was considered a god. He was worshipped. That makes a lot of sense how that works.
Exactly. And so that's what Satan has been doing since the beginning. He's been trying to replicate how things are in heaven on earth. And what's really interesting is it's really only in the last 400 years or so, and maybe even less, that as humans we've really lost sight of the reality of life. Meaning we've lost sight of the connection between heaven and the earth. It's only in the last 400 years where scientists have been able to propagate all this information and all this stuff to make heaven really, really far away. And the idea of us and our lives in heaven interacting with us on an integral level, and it's just that disconnect is not the same. I mean, we can go back and look throughout history at things like the French Revolution and all sorts of different compromises that we've made through time. And we all know these things. That's not the point of this discussion today, but we know kind of what has led us to this breaking point. But I just wanted to make that point clear, that there's two aspects of heaven, in the sense of there's a religious aspect and there's also the political aspect. So these angels, the very angels whom from their exalted position shouted for joy over the creation of our world and over the creation of our first parents. So these angels in heaven, and this is talking about the loyal ones here, that triumph, they were present when God was making our world. They were present when God was creating. They knew what was going on, and they were excited for this fact. They were happy, right? Do we see that here in the text where it says that they were shouting for joy over the creation of our world and over the creation of our parents? Do we see that?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So they were excited because they were going to have the earth. The angels witnessed the fall of man, his expulsion from the Eden home, are most intensely interested to work in union with the fallen, redeemed race in the development of that power which God gives to help every man who will unite with heavenly intelligences to seek and to save human beings who are perishing in their sins. Now, a lot of the times, a lot of the quotes I have, there's certain points of the quote that kind of fit into what the story, but I left a lot of the quotes whole because I didn't want to just rip sentences out of their context specifically, and I really liked the full package because I don't want it to just be like, okay, hey, I'm telling you guys a story or telling you guys the information or this is how the world was created. But in each one of these in each one of these paragraphs or each one of these statements, there are so many things that we can pull apart and really apply to our each individual lives. I mean, it's like it's not just talking about creation. She's always talking about Christ and always talking about salvation and always helping us how to be lifted up. So that was one thing that I really liked about as I was studying this topic. But anyhow, so it goes on to say, if we will become partakers of the divine natures, separate selfishness from our lives, special talents for helping one another will be granted to us. And if we will love Christ, if all will love as Christ has loved, that perishing man would be saved from ruin. And what a change would come to our world. I mean, we can all agree on that. But I just think that this is the point that I wanted us to remember from this one. We've started at the foundations of the earth were laid, the temple in heaven was built, and the angels are now excited over the fact that the earth is going to be developed. The foundation's already there, but God's going to build on that foundation, and there's going to be a new line of people. So let's go to Genesis now. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. If you want to go there in your Bibles, you can. I do have the verses on the screen. But in Genesis chapter 1, starting in verses 1, says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Now, here, I think about this heaven and this earth. I'm thinking about it in the terms of location. At this point, we're just seeing that verse. We're not looking at anything that says below. We know later on God is going to tell us that he's going to make something called a firmament, and he's going to call that firmament heaven. But I don't think that this is talking about that heaven yet. I think this is talking about where God is, that heaven, and then earth, as in where we are as the earth. That's how I see it. Verse 2, it says that the earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So right here in verse 2, we see that there's already things present. It's not that God is in a vacuum of nothing. God is in a place where there are things that already exist. There is an earth that is formless and void, or as the Hebrew says, the tohu and the bohu, or as it said before, the foundations of the earth were laid. So the foundations were there, but nothing was on that yet. Also, it says that there was waters that were already present. So there's waters present. Wherever he is, there's waters present. And then whether it's in those waters or above the waters or under the waters or however, there's waters present, and the earth is there in the waters, and it doesn't have a shape. Now, let's think about this. Where would God be, or where this is a question that I had and I was thinking about. Where would God be where is God right now? Like, let's discuss this. Where is God doing this? Where that may sound like a simple question, but really think about it. Like, where do you think God is right now in this verse?
How I picture it is like it's kind of just like a void, and then God is like above, and all the angels are above, and they look straight down, and they just see like a blanket of just water and nothing really, just of water, and then that's kind of how I see it, because the firmament isn't there dividing heaven.
Not yet. That's right.
Earth. So they look straight down, and they just see like a kind of like a sheet of water. That's what I'm thinking of. I don't know for sure.
I like that. I like how your mind is thinking, and this is something that I have some plans of some things that I really want to start doing, sharing with you guys a lot more. One of them is meditation and the power of meditation. When you allow the Word of God to you focus on the Word and you try to picture this. This is literally, I can find the stuff in Inspiration, or even W.W. Prescott writes about it, where you allow the Word to, like, you meditate on it, you think about the Word, you picture creation, you look at what the Word says, and then you're like trying to picture what it says. Even Eugene Pruitt, if you go on YouTube and you look up Eugene Pruitt, and he talks about the thoughts on, was it mind something and something else? counsel something on the mind that Sister White writes. Anyway, it just says that one of the biggest things that society has done to attack our minds is like television and social media and junk food and all this stuff. It's to make our minds so clogged and so like unable to process and think high thoughts and think heavenly things. But that's one of the ways that God really wants to communicate truth to us and help us to see things. I mean, we pray and we read His Word, but we need to sit still and listen and allow Him to communicate with us through our minds. But that's another thing in and of itself. But I like the way that you were saying that, Ryan, and I see the same thing. Let's consider this. God is probably in heaven, I imagine, because God is usually on His throne. I mean, I'm not saying that God isn't always on His throne, but I imagine in this scene, God is on His throne. I imagine that they're in the temple, that God is on His throne, and if we think about the heavenly sanctuary, if you go to Revelation chapter, I think it's Revelation chapter, is it 6 where it starts talking about it? No, it's 4. Revelation chapter 4 that kind of talks about it. It talks about what's happening in the heavenly sanctuary. And it says that right before, in verse 6, Revelation chapter 4, verses 6, it says, "And before the throne was a sea of glass like unto a crystal." And in other places in Revelation, it says that there's a river of water that flows out of God's throne. And I imagine if that river is flowing out of God's throne, it's probably flowing somewhere. And if it collects into a body of water, it's probably going to eventually be what we know as a sea. And this is really interesting because if you go down in creation, and we'll get there, the word sea wasn't something that Adam came up with. It was actually God is the one that named what a sea was. When he, as we read later on, it's going to tell us that He gathered all the water together, and He called the gathering of the water together a sea. So when it talks about the sea of glass that's in heaven, if as what we translate the ancient Greek word for glass into glass, whatever John is seeing that he thinks looks like glass, whether it's ice or crystals or however, it's a body or collection of this thing. I think God is on His throne, and I think He's looking down at the sea of glass, and I think that's the body of water right there where He's doing the creation in. But that's as we see further on. I'll explain why I say that. Ryan, go ahead.
When God created the remember, there was water above the firmament and below the firmament, I believe, right?
Yes.
So, like, is the water above the firmament in heaven? Like, it's above the firmament. So, could that also have something to do with the sea of glass?
Right.
Ryan looks like he's going ahead of the message here, right?
Well, no, his mind is just thinking based on what the Word says. I mean, I'm not the one saying anything. It's the Word that says it, not me.
Yeah.
But, so let's continue on. As we understand, the waters are there now. So verse 3, God says, "Let there be light." There was light. Verse 4, God saw the light that it was good. He divided the light from the darkness, and He called the light day and the darkness night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And this is something that I also saw was very interesting, that as God is doing things in creation, there's a lot of things have division in it. In the day and night, he sees this thing, and then He causes division. And He takes, in the division, He separates something, and He says, this over here is light, this over here is darkness. He causes a division. And we're going to see as we go through in the next few verses, it says in verse 6, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it cause a division. Let it divide the waters from the waters." So this is the second thing that's divided. And it's really interesting. As you go through and look in Genesis, you're going to realize that God is like causing these very distinct lines of division where you don't have two of the same thing. And I was actually just even meditating on this a little bit with the idea of, because He separates and divides the water from the land. And I'm like, but what about mud, right? Mud is like the idea of water and land being mixed together. But really, what is mud? If you let mud sit long enough, mud is either going to turn into water on top and sediment on the bottom, or it's going to turn into sediment on top and water on the bottom. Like, it isn't really both. Over time, it's going to tell you which one it really is, whether it's water or whether it's land. You don't have a mixture of the two. Those are just things I was thinking on. But yeah, so there's this division where the waters here are divided from the waters. So, okay, beforehand, let me not go too far. There's no firmament here yet. There's no division of the waters yet. There is light. There is a formless earth. There is water. And then there is the division of the night and the day. So, this is very interesting to me. There's light here already, and there's darkness, but there's no planets yet. There's no stars, there's no sun, there's no moon. There's just a shapeless planet. Light is allowed there now, and there's a division there that divides the light from the darkness. Okay, now going forward. Verse 7, he made the firmament to divide the waters which are under the firmament from the waters which are above the firmament. And that's where you were talking about, Ryan. And I don't have any pictures yet, and I'm not a graphic artist in the sense of like my capability of drawing. I do love doing photo manipulations and things, but I do want to try and actually draw this thing out that I have in my mind, because maybe it would even help me to understand it better. And it's just been a very fun study anyway. But how I understand it is that if he's looking in the sea of glass, God's on his throne, and he's right looking out in front of him in the sea of glass, and everyone in heaven is all surrounded, and they're all excited about the fact that he's about to make the world right in front of them. And he is there in the sea of glass now, and he says, okay, there's the earth. Now I want this firmament to separate the water that's under the firmament. So there's this division. Under the water is going to gather together, because he hasn't gathered it together yet, but in verse 9 it says, let the waters under the heaven be gathered. So he gathers all that water together, and then the waters that are outside of, above the firmament, that is separate. So you have a division now. You have a collection of water that's gathered together here. Then you have the firmament that separates this body of water, and then you have the rest of the body of water. At least that's as far as my mind pictures what's being said here. I don't know if anyone else sees that way, but that's what I'm seeing here. So there's this division of the waters. Tennessee family, go ahead.
Brother Isaac, it's not until like this week you were mentioning it to me, and I started looking further, and that we've never really contemplated where is that water that's above the firmament. They tried growing up, they tried to tell me it's the clouds. But if as you go on further, we will see what God put into this firmament. And the water that he gathered that was not on the earth is above the firmament.
Right.
So it cannot just be the clouds.
No.
Because the clouds are a part of the firmament.
Right.
Here. So these are just stuff that we probably didn't take the chance to think, where is the water that's above the firmament?
Or where did God make the earth? Where did God create us? Where are we? I mean, in relations to God, so many times we think about the universe, we think about the endless expanse and the space and the distance and the stuff, but we never think about, and then on the other side of that is the heavenly sanctuary with the angels and the throne of God and all these things. We never realize that there is reality wherever up is, right? Because if there's an up, we know that Jesus ascended to heaven. He descended to heaven, from heaven. It says angels ascend and descend. And we're going to see some other statements where it talks about specifically where we, when we're saved, where we actually ascend to, and how we actually enter into heaven, and how it's connected with the sea of glass. And you'll see why I believe that it's happening in the sea of glass. I've never had those questions. I've never thought about those things. But it makes so much sense to me because heaven exists before earth. heaven's existence heaven's existence and heaven's location isn't dependent upon earth. Earth's location and earth's existence is dependent upon heaven. We're not important because of them. Like, how am I trying to word this the right way? You know, if we were going to say, like, there's a center of the universe or center of the galaxy, like, the earth isn't the main thing. Heaven is the reality. Heaven is the main thing. We're like let's say a product or an off thing, but we're this thing that God was really excited about. He was going to make mankind. He was going to make a new line of being. All of heaven was excited, and we're going to see as the statements continue reading on, because I'm just taking a short break from the story to look at what the scriptures say about the actual kind of like the structure and the material of what's God is working with, and we'll see that everyone is excited except one person. Only one person was not happy that God was making mankind, and he made a big stink about it. So anyhow, verse 8, we see God now calls this firmament, this thing that divides the waters that are collected together under it from the ones that are above it, he calls it heaven. Evening and the morning of the second day. So then he says he gathers the water into one place, and the dry land appears now. And notice, God calls the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. He's the one that named them seas, not us. It wasn't Adam that named the sea. Adam wasn't existing yet when God did all this. So God is the one that's making all these things, naming them. And it's not to say that he's, like, I was thinking to myself, you know, it's not that God couldn't have come up with this thing originally or on his own before, but if we see here in heaven, there was already a sea of glass, then why would he... Okay, well, I'm saying if we see in heaven there's already a sea of glass, why would he call a body of water that's collected again something different? I feel like it would just use the same thing. Like in heaven there were trees, so he comes down to earth, he calls them trees as well. In heaven there is water, on earth there is water as well. So it's not like, you know, these things that happen here don't exist. I mean, am I making sense? Does the thought that I'm trying to paint, is it understandable?
The one thing is you're talking about the sea of glass in heaven, and you're saying it's a sea of glass, but then you're talking about it as if it's a sea of water. It says it's a sea of glass.
Right.
A sea of water.
Right, but where do you think the water, or where do you think that body of whatever flows from? Where do you think it gets its substance? Huh?
Not from glass.
So
the scripture talks about that one expanse there in heaven, and the saved are there, and they're on a sea of glass. It doesn't say a sea of water.
right.
It doesn't say they're walking on water; they're on glass.
Right, I understand that. I don't believe that the top of it is water. I think what John is seeing could be ice, or it could be, I think ice makes sense because glacier, you would look at a glacier and you would say it has a glass-like appearance. I'm not sure exactly what John is seeing, but John is describing it the best that he can. The reason why I say that he's looking in the sea of glass and operating in it, and that it's a body of water, is because of the way that the Bible describes it, from the things that are taking place, and also because of what inspiration says. Again, I haven't gotten to the quotes yet, but specifically, Ellen White says, and I'll share it with you later on, she says that we as believers are all gathered together into a cloud with Jesus, and that we ascend to heaven for 7 days. But she doesn't say we ascend to heaven. She says specifically that we are ascending to the sea of glass. She says from earth, we gather together in a cloud, and we ascend to the sea of glass. Then she says once we get to the sea of glass, the 144,000 stand in a perfect square. They have the special thing. They sing a special song. They march in. We all march in together, all the multitude of believers, and the progression goes forth. But how we get into heaven from earth is we go up to the sea of glass. Somehow it opens, or however, we land on the sea of glass and then enter in. So does that help to kind of explain why I say that, Rob?
No, not really. I mean, I can understand ascending. I can understand ascending on a cloud, but that doesn't mean where we're going to is water that's frozen over or anything like that.
No, right, I hear you. What I'm saying is, Ellen White says, not me. Ellen White says.
To see your quotes.
Yeah, I'll show you. I mean, I have them here as I continue to go on, but yeah, I'll just let the quotes speak for themselves, and that's why I have them in here, because I don't want to be the one saying, oh, well, did you know this or did you see this? I'd rather just read it to you. So I'll continue, I promise, and if you have questions that I don't answer anything, we can discuss them afterwards. You know, again, this isn't something set in stone where you say if you don't believe this, you're not going to go to heaven. This is just something that really helped me. Like last night as it was yesterday or day before yesterday. I never was able to relate to Ellen White when she says, I don't like it here. Like, I feel so very lonely here in this dimly dark lit place. And why she would feel like it's such a dimly dark lit place, why she would feel like it's this small, tiny thing, because she saw heaven. Why did she feel like heaven was so big and so grand compared to what earth is, and why it feels so cramped here? And I was just dwelling and meditating on these thoughts about where we are and our relation to heaven, and I actually started feeling claustrophobic. Like, I don't know how to describe it except for imagine being like in a buried in a box underground. It's not like your movements are absolutely restricted. You can still move your arms, you can still move your legs, but just that mental thought of not being able to actually move can make you lose your mind. It can actually make you go crazy. And yesterday I started feeling a little claustrophobic. Like, I was just dwelling on heaven and the fact that, like, it's right there and that we're stuck. Like, no one has gone up. The best of the best have tried. If you think about the Tower of Babel, you know, in Josephus' writings and stuff, it says that that tower took 3 days just to walk around. The circumference of the tower took you 3 whole days of just to walk around. And then to take the bricks from the bottom of the tower to the top of the tower, by the time they were done, they said it took a whole year's journey. So a whole year to bring one brick down from the bottom to the top, and it took 3 days to go around. So, like, I can't imagine how tall that thing was and how high they actually wanted to go, and the fact that God said no and, you know, destroyed it and changed our language at that point and made it so that we'll never be that organized ever again as humans. But
And where did you get that from?
that's in Josephus's writings. It's not that it's factual or not. That's just what it says in I forgot the name of the account, but it's in Josephus's writings, something about ancient Jewish history. Okay, so going back to Genesis now, and then I'll try to. Okay, Ryan, sorry, you wanted to say something. Go ahead, Ryan.
I understand what you mean by claustrophobic. Like, I just think of Earth, and I just kind of like imagine what I'm imagining is we're on this little planet, and Earth, like, whatever, some people say it's a globe or it's flat. I don't want to go there.
Right.
Just imagine on
Yeah.
Earth.
Right.
Right? And like you zoom out, and it just gets so tiny compared to like the rest of the universe. And like there's just a ginormous plane of existence right above us. And I don't know, I just imagine us in the middle of nowhere, just getting like, we're microscopic and we can't move out of it. Where that's it, you know, until we get to heaven.
Well,
It's
and
almost like,
go.
it's almost like if there's this, it's kind of like this scientific movie that, I don't know, I don't want to get into it, but the reason I point this out is because I had this here as a little kid. I don't know if you've ever like heard of this, but like, what if like a dome was put over where you live, like a city or something, or like a plane of existence, and you knew, like even an entire country, and you knew that for the rest of your life that there was a major world out there, and you could not venture out there, like you had to live and die in the dome.
Mhm.
That would be terrifying. for me, just the thought of not being able to leave, just being in there forever, like what? It makes you feel like so terrified. And that's kind of what we live in Earth.
Exactly.
Area where we cannot move out, and further we live and we die here.
Yes.
And and then that's it. Well, of course it's not. If we're saved,
Right.
God says, Ellen White will be able to visit other planets. We'll be able to explore this gargantuan galaxy.
Right.
Everything is infinite. The knowledge never ends. We're always going to be learning. The exploring, I imagine, that probably also never ends.
Right.
Everything about heaven never ends. It's going to be able to last for eternity. But here on Earth, it's not that way. So I can kind of get how Ellen White thought. Like she wasn't able to explore the planets. She had to be confined to this little planet.
Right.
It's amazing.
Well, and so that's what's so interesting for me with this. What you just said, if all of us had that train of thought, if all of us had the thought of feeling uncomfortable because we know that we're limited because of sin and unrighteousness and all that it's done to cause and what God has to do, we would all be wanting God to change things. The majority, not the minority. Right now, the majority of the people are so, as some people say, they're so bought into the matrix. They're so brainwashed by these systems and all these different things that Satan has set up to trap our minds from the reality that God is real, that God is near to us, that God cares about us, that he wants to provide for us. And we get so caught up in politics, and it's the Democrats and the Republicans and all this other stuff, and it's all this smoke screen when God is right here, just trying to as Rob said earlier, have a relationship with us. He's like I don't know. I can't describe God's emotions, but I can only imagine that he really desires to. Like I said, this isn't nothing that is set in stone. It has to be the way that things are. But as I can think, it calls this thing a sea of glass that's right before God. Whether it's I don't know why it would be glass, but as in the sense of a hard substance like we call glass. We know in the scriptures almost so many things, like when we read about land in prophecy, it relates to a place of less population. We talk about waters in prophecy. It talks about a place of great population. We don't actually look for a body of water for the beast to come out of. So when it talks about a sea of glass here, does it mean it has to actually be like a glass like my glass is made of? Is it when you read it, it actually says a lot about crystal, and I don't have all the information. I actually want to study this myself and more. I was looking up the word glass and sea of glass and looking in the Greek today, but I didn't have enough that I felt comfortable in sharing on. So the only things I want to share on are what I feel like I understand and I can comprehend, and that I feel comfortable with. If I don't feel like I understand something, I'm not really going to say anything about it. But anyhow, one of the things I want to move on, before I move on and add, is that when God here is putting these lights in verse 16, he's putting the lights to rule the day, the lights to rule the night. He sets them in the firmament of the heaven. This is on the fourth day. So we notice in the first day, there's light and darkness, and there's a division between the two. On the fourth day, this is when the actual, the time as we would understand begins. Because that's when he starts putting a sun, he puts stars, he puts the moon, and he also puts, it says, seasons and days and years. So we know that that's when the rotation of whatever. And actually, I was meditating upon that again today, about gravity and about magnetism, and trying to think about with the whole rotational and everything like that, and the idea of, if you spin really fast around and you're holding something, does it come closer to your body or further from your body? Well, I think, as we all know, if you hold on to a rope and you start spinning really far, that thing goes farther and farther and farther away from your body. It doesn't come closer to you. And I don't know, the faster that you spin, it would ever come closer to you or not. But I understand that something that has a lot of mass kind of attracts things to it. And so these are just other thoughts that I was trying to have, and I don't have all these things written down yet. Maybe I will write them down and one day have all the answers to them that God can give us in science. But until then, I'll still continue studying. So, Review Herald, February 11, 1902. All heaven took a deep and joyful interest in the creation of the world and of man. Human beings were a new and distinct order. They were made in the image of God, and it was the Creator's design that they should populate the earth. They were to live in close communion with heaven, receiving power from the source of all power. Upheld by God, they were to live sinless lives. Satan determined to defeat God's plans. He began by bringing jealousy into the heavenly courts. Again, the political aspect of things. To many, the angels, he communicated his dissatisfaction, and there was a war in heaven which ended in the expulsion of his sympathizers. Thrust out of heaven, Satan determined to set up his kingdom on earth. Through him, sin entered the world, and by death, and death by sin. By listening to his misrepresentations, Adam fell, and the floodgates of woe were opened unto the world. So we see here, everyone's excited. God's making a new line of beings. God's making the earth. He's gonna have people that just look just like him. It's gonna be awesome. We're gonna have close communion with heaven. Satan is not happy. Actually, there's another quote where it even says it even worse, where it says like Satan was not happy that God was doing this. So Satan's unhappy that this is taking place. Because of that, he starts making this, as I said, he starts spreading dissatisfaction in heaven. That gets him in trouble. He gets cast out. So because of that, then he says, well, since then, I'm going to take earth and I'm going to see if I can corrupt Adam and get Adam to be on my side. That kind of shows you the timeline of when everything was taking place. There was no excuse for Adam's transgression. All his wants were generously supplied. And this is actually the same for us today. I thought this is so true for us now, just like it was for Adam back then. I mean, it's obviously different. Adam was in a much better advantage, but the same truth is still the same. God still supplies all of our needs very generously. One prohibition was laid upon him. God said, of every tree of the garden thou mayst freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat. What's our prohibition? I mean, you can think about don't do this and don't do that, but God says don't sin. Live righteously, don't choose sin. Anything that's not of faith is sin. So live of faith. Live of faith, not of sin. This prohibition Satan used as a means of insinuating his aggression. And I think that that's really interesting. Satan is using the one thing that God says not to do as the reason to get you to do the thing. He takes the one thing God says don't and uses that. The fact that God says don't do it is why you actually need to do it. God doth know, he said to the woman, that in the days that you eat thereof, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desired to make one wise, she took the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And God said unto Adam, which is very interesting again, notice who he's talking to here. He says to Adam, because thou hearken unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, curses the ground for thy sake. I think it's so interesting, but there's some people out there, influential men, that are going out and bringing this message of masculinity back to society. At least they're trying to do it. Some of them are going a little too far and can become more toxic than helpful, but the concept of bringing the roles of gender back, bringing men's roles and women's roles, and having us respect that, and showing how that will actually fix a lot of the problems in society. If men are happy and satisfied being men, they'll do manly things. And if women are satisfied and they feel fulfilled being a woman, and they'll do their womanly things. And if we can both encourage each other to find out who we are as men and as women, we can grow together. But when you have men it's very strange what's going on. But there's women that want the roles of men, or not even want. Sometimes women are pushed or forced into the roles of men because there isn't a man to fill that need. The woman has to then be the one that also nurses the children and provides, and and again, this sermon isn't about men's rights and women's rights and things, but if you just go back to creation and look at the order and the way that God did everything and set everything up, you'll see that if we were to follow that all the way through, we would have such a better society now. Adam should have been there to protect the wife, and Eve first off shouldn't have listened to the devil anyway. But had Adam been there, maybe, I should say maybe, definitely, I think for a fact it wouldn't have happened. And but Adam at the same time should have also been more manually. He should have been a masculine man as God made him, to say, no, I'm still going to choose God, not give in to this sin, not give in to temptation, even if you are beautiful, even if you are my wife. And not do that. So anyhow, he didn't follow the order that God had commanded him, and we know the curses that come there afterwards. Oh, the other thing too that I thought was really interesting about this, the curses that come, if you think about the curses for the ground and all the hard work and all these things, one of the things that Jesus teaches is that we need to carry our cross and follow him. Jesus right here, I mean not Jesus, but God right here in the Word, it says that hard work is going to be given to us for our benefit. Hard work is actually good for us as mankind, especially as men. Hard work is good for us because it helps us to grow our characters, it helps us to grow strong work ethic, strong muscles even, physique, and it allows, when we are working in line with God and doing things all for his glory, of course it helps us develop our God-likeness as well. But anyhow, I'm going to move forward because I do have a lot of slides. So this one reviewer held, it ended with, this lesson is for all mankind. By it, God teaches that his word is to be sacredly respected and his commands implicitly obeyed. One of the things that I was realizing as I was studying is that in the story of Genesis, it's so much more than I ever thought it was. That in the story of Genesis, there's actually the story of the great controversy being explained as well and being brought forth when you see this division between the dark and the lightness, and the lightness and dark and these different things. You can see the great controversy pulled in there as well. So it's like you can get the actual, like, the material or the matter of the substance, right? Planets and moons and water and dirt. But you can also get spiritual lessons as well, as opposed to like good and evil and what happens when you follow good principles and good counsel versus what happens when you don't follow good principles and good counsel. And so there's so many layers that are in that story that I really, really appreciate. But so another quote, Satan in heaven had hated Christ for his position in the courts of God. The reason I added that one in there was just, again, reiterating that idea or the concept that in heaven there's the religious aspect, but there's also the political aspect as well. Again, Stephen Haskell writes in his book, The Story of the Seer of Patmos, Satan, once light bearer in the heavenly court, claimed that light dwelt in him. Light bearer, I don't know if that's like a rank, like we would say general or first lieutenant. Light bearer could be like a rank or not, but we know that Satan had very high standings in the heavenly courts. So the timeline. Now this is very interesting. Look at the timeline of when everything is happening. Remember, we're still talking about creation. We're talking about the fall of Lucifer. We haven't gotten to the bottomless pit yet, but we kind of have been. So think about when all these things are taking place. We are certainly living amidst the closing scenes of this earth's history. I feel that now we are able to be exceedingly careful what influence we should exert. The loyal angels took a deep, rejoicing interest in the creation of our world and in the creation of man. But Satan took no pleasure in the creation of Adam and Eve. Because of his beauty, Satan became exalted and jealous of Jesus Christ until he, with all his sympathizers, were cast out of heaven. Notice, then. When? Then is when. So after he was cast out of heaven, then he began to work to gain Adam and Eve as his property. He misrepresented the character of God by falsely accusing him. Adam believed the lie of the deceiver and thus placed himself under the banner of the Prince of Darkness. Ryan.
I always thought that Satan was cast out before Adam and Eve.
Same here.
But it seems that he was cast out sometime after they were created.
That's
and
right.
In fact, their creation was a part of the reason why he rebelled in the first place.
Exactly. Ryan, I felt the same way you did. And I was so frustrated because in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, why did God put Satan the same place we are? If there's an entire universe out there, cast him out to a different planet where he can be by himself and leave us alone. Why cast him out to the place where you're going to make us? Like, to me, I was just so upset at God in that. I'm like, that's like the worst decision. Why would you do that? I didn't understand that. Yeah, it was really
like why put like a legion of demons and like literally where we're literally living, you know?
Right.
I thought the same thing, but also I have a feeling or a sense that it has to do with why God did that. It has to do with the great controversy. It's a similar reason why God let Satan out to go.
Well,
the same sense.
well, so God is really smart, and I obviously I can't say, well, this is why he did that or this is why he did this, because I'm not God and I can't say. But one thing that I have been able to see as I've been studying this is realizing that God has been vindicated over and over and over and over again. Every single thing that has happened, Satan has twisted it and falsely accused it and made it seem like God is the one at fault, when actually it's all things are on him. That's what's been happening in my mind the more that I've been studying this. All the little questions and things that I wanted to blame God for that I couldn't understand, I'm realizing that they're actually Satan's fault. Like when we're talking about why was he brought here, right? Why was he put here in this earth? That wasn't the case. You remember, it says that all of the angels here they're rejoicing interest in the creation of the world and the creation of man. So imagine this. Again, this is my mind. I'm thinking God's in the throne, sea of glass. He's working down there in the waters, and he does the firmament and all the stuff that's going on right in front of him. And so he's making man, all the angels, and everyone's excited about what's going on. Satan's unhappy. Satan's right beside God, right? He's the closest one. So he's unhappy with what's going on. Then as this is taking place, maybe he's off duty or however their duties work. He's just growing dissatisfaction. Maybe Jesus is going down and spending a lot of time with Adam and Eve and teaching them things. And so, Satan, that's heaven has that vacant. But Jesus is down there spending time with them and so forth. And so he's able to kind of make this dissatisfaction go on. Why, when he gets cast out and why he gets put down there, I'm not sure. But what I understand is that he's cast out of heaven. It doesn't say that he was cast out to the earth. It just says that he was cast out of heaven. It then says that he then, in his mind, wanted to gain Adam and Eve. So he wanted the earth more so than God sent him to the earth. That was something that was really good for my mind to understand. It wasn't so much that God sent him here to trap him to make this his prison. It was that he was no longer welcomed in heaven. And Satan on his own said, okay, well, I'm going to choose earth and I'm going to go after Adam and Eve. And he gained them. And that is what led to where we are. It was not like Satan went to God and said, well, I want the earth. And then God said, okay, fine, you can have Adam and Eve and so forth and so forth. God never gave Adam and Eve to Satan. Adam and Eve chose willingly to give themselves to Satan. It was not God's fault. It was their own fault. But anyhow, so yes.
I remember also, I'm not sure, but he had tempted other worlds, but they didn't give in.
Right.
Only the ones that gave in.
That's also right. So it wasn't like God is not to blame. That's one thing that I'm realizing, that God is so vindicated in this. God, and you'll see as it goes on, it says, where is it? God didn't want, Yeah, in his wisdom, God did not use measures of force to suppress Satan's rebellion. Such measures would have aroused sympathy for Satan, strengthening his rebellion, than strengthening his rebellion rather than changing his principles. So if God had just punished him, they would have looked like he was dealt unjustly. Because remember, Satan's also very smart and sneaky. He wasn't going to do this in a way where he couldn't have as much as the upper hand advantage as possible. Satan was trying to make it seem like he had the upper hand advantage. And so God knew that he couldn't just act arbitrarily. So I understand these things. But even though God wanted the time to go on, God wanted this thing to manifest that Satan could demonstrate his principles, God did not give Satan a space to do that in. God never said, here is X territory, manifest your principles here. But God is God of freedom of choice. So if anyone wants to participate in Satan's principles and to see if that will continue on, by all means, the choice is yours. But God did not say, hey, you join this, or hey, you do that. God never gave permission for that. Satan was the one that did his thing, and we joined. And like Sister Taryn said, no other world participated, only ours did, unfortunately. So, see here, he criticized the law, he criticized the government, and so forth. So, moving forward, by making false charges and misstating the purposes and declared will of God, he secured sympathizers. Adam and Eve were placed on trial and failed. Satan deceived Eve, and she disobeyed God. The holy pair, not resisting temptation, were brought under Satan's jurisdiction. The enemy gained supremacy over the human race, bringing death, the penalty of disobedience. But Jesus declared that he would bear the penalty for sin, that he would conquer Satan by coming to the world and meeting the foe on his own battlefield. When Satan entered upon his campaign, Satan met him and contested every inch of ground, exerting his utmost powers to conquer him. Much was involved in this controversy. The questions to be answered were, is God's law imperfect, in need of being amended or abrogated? Is it immutable? Is God's government stable, or is it in need of changes? Not only before those living in the city of God, but before the inhabitants of all the heavenly universe were these questions to be answered. You see, like one thing that's really, really awesome, and I was thinking about this right before, I was in Sabbath school or during or after Sabbath school. God's law itself is not the source of sin. God's law did not produce sin. Sin was not produced by the law, right? And what's really interesting is if you put us in a vacuum away from Satan, right? These are the thoughts that I was thinking. Would we sin if Satan wasn't there with temptations? Of course, if temptations weren't there, then there'd be way less likely a chance for us to sin. The potential would still be there, but I think the likelihood of it would be far less. But this is what is really interesting. Even if you put Satan into that same situation, Satan being in an environment or not being in an environment is not reason or a justifiable reason to say as an excuse or a cause for sin. Meaning that there is no cause, right? There is no like justifiable reason. There's nowhere you can say that this is why it's okay, because Jesus came and proved it. Jesus lived in a perfect world where there was no sin. Of course, Satan wasn't there and he didn't sin. Jesus came into our imperfect world where there was thousands of years of degradation and sin, and still did not have sin. He did not need to. It was not necessary. And the same thing is for us too. It's not necessary to sin. So the law in of itself is not the cause or the reason for the sin. So the law is perfect. The law isn't flawed. The law does not need to be changed. It was Satan that the problem was in, and that's what's going to be pointed out, or that's what's going to be shown by this great controversy. At the end of the day, we're going to see, no, God's law was fine. Everything was perfect. It was actually all in the heart of Satan that everything we were suffering for came out of. And that will be clearly exposed. So, the bottomless pit. That expression, the bottomless pit, represents the earth in a state of confusion and darkness. It is evident from other scriptures concerning the condition of the earth in the beginning. The Bible record says that it was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. The word here translated deep is the same that in Revelation 20, 1 through 3 is rendered bottomless pit. Prophecy teaches that it will be brought back, partially at least, to this condition. Looking forward to the great day of God, the prophet Jeremiah declares, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. And I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. And I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and the birds of the heavens were fled. And I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was as a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down. W. Prescott writes in The Doctrine of Christ, thus the scriptures clearly prove that the earth is yet to be desolate, without an inhabitant, broken down, without form and void, even as it was when it was first created, before man was made to dwell upon it. In this condition, it is called the deep, the abyss, which in our version is rendered bottomless pit. And so the reason I had that one is because I asked myself, are we in the bottomless pit, or is the earth the bottomless pit? And I think the answer to that might be yes for both. Like, under the sea of glass is considered the bottomless pit, or the earth itself is just considered the bottomless pit. But either way, as far as I see it, we're under the sea of glass. There's no getting around that for me in my mind. There's no getting around the fact that in heaven there's a sea of glass and that we're underneath it somewhere. Between the distance between that and stuff and whatever else, all that stuff, I don't know. I don't understand. It's not revealed. But that part, at least I know for a fact, is revealed. So the sea of glass. Rob, here's that quote you were looking for that you're so excited about. And there's other ones too. It says, we all entered into the cloud together and were 7 days ascending to the sea of glass. Now, what I thought was really interesting is, like, how far away is heaven from earth? Well, we know that there's space and there's a distance, and now we have a time. So 7 days is the time, that's the distance between heaven and earth. How far? We don't know how the speed we're going, right? We don't know the rate of travel, so there's no way of actually doing the calculation of how far the distance would be. But that's interesting to think. If you just ascend 7 days straight, you might get there. But it says, yeah,
May not be 7 days. May take a pause for something. I mean, there may be things he wants to talk to us about before we get to heaven.
Right. It just says that this is the timeline that she has. There's a 7-day journey that's going together, and I believe the cloud there, I think, is angels. But so we ascend to the sea of glass, which would mean that you're under it. You can't ascend to something that's below you. So you're ascending to something that is above you. You ascend to the sea of glass. When they land there, Jesus brought the crowns and with his own right hand placed them on our heads. He gave us harps of gold and palms of victory. Here on the sea of glass, the 144,000 stood in a perfect square. Some of them had very bright crowns, others not so bright. Some crowns appeared heavy with stars, while others had but few. All were perfectly satisfied with their crowns, and they were clothed with a glorious white mantle from their shoulders to their feet. Angels were all about us as we marched over the sea of glass to the gate of the city. Jesus raised his mighty, glorious arm, laid hold of the pearly gate, swung it back on its glittering hinges, and said to us, "You have washed your robes in my blood, stood stiffly for my truth. Enter in." We marched in and felt that we had a perfect right in the city. So that's why I say there that in the heavenly sanctuary, God's on the throne. Right before his throne is a sea of glass. Around them is the 24 elders and then the hundreds of bajillions of angels around them. We ascend to that surface, to that sea of glass plane that's right before God's throne, and then everything takes place after that. That's as far as I understand, that's the concept, or that I see, or as far as God's been leading me as I've been studying and so forth. Again, no one has to agree or disagree. It's not to say I'm right, this is wrong, this is proving that theory, this theory. This is just some statements from inspiration that it says that we have to look at, and that I haven't really heard brought forth in this way before. No one really, I mean, when you read through Sister White's writings, if you do a study on the word firmaments, just type in the word firmaments and see how many times she uses it. It's like almost 1,000 times. And she talks about the firmament, she talks about outside, the sun and the stars in the firmament, the birds flying in the firmament, and all these things about the firmament. She uses it as like it's a regular common day language. Whenever we go outside, we talk about the sky, we talk about space, we talk about the atmosphere, but I've never heard the word firmament used in society at all, much less Christianity. But that's what that thing is called up there, according to what God said. He said he made a firmament that divides the waters, and in that firmament he put the planet and all the stars and all the stuff that we see when we look outside. But anyway, in closing, I wanted to end it with this, and I like the fact that this Sabbath we've talked about so much creation stuff. I feel like every study, every part of the service so far has been adding on to creation, even the children's story. So I was really excited. But it says, and this is really awesome for us today, that are at the end of time, because it's going to get worse. In his isolated home, John was able to study more closely than ever before the manifestations of divine power as recorded in the book of nature and in the pages of inspiration. So in his isolated home, maybe his country property, as we would say in our country properties, and when we say isolated, we know that as time goes on, that's one of the things we really need to do is try to stick together, like what Rob said earlier, make sure we assemble together, because the isolation, they're going to try to force that upon us. Why do we want to bring it upon ourselves before the time? So as to him, it was a delight to meditate on the work of creation. So John did Christian meditation. He also adored, he meditated on the work of creation, and he adored the divine architect. In former years, his eyes had been greeted by the sight of forest-covered hills, green valleys, and fruitful plains. And in the beauties of nature, it had ever been his delight to trace the wisdom and skill of the Creator. He was now surrounded by scenes that to many would appear gloomy and uninteresting, but to John it was otherwise. While his surroundings might be desolate and barren, the blue heavens that bent above him were as bright and as beautiful as the skies above his loved Jerusalem. In the wild, rugged rocks, in the mysteries of the deep, in the glories of the firmament, he read important lessons. All bore the message of God's power and glory. And this is why I believe, I think Psalms 104, doesn't it start out by saying that the heavens declare the glory of God? Actually, let me just turn there really fast. Who coverest thyself with light as with a garment? Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain? Who lays the beams of the chambers in water? Who makes the clouds his chariots? Who walks upon the wings of the wind? Who makes angels his spirits, his ministers a flame of fire? Who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be moved forever? Who covered it with the deep as with a garment, and the water stood above the mountains. And I think that's interesting how it describes how he covered the waters. He covered the land with water like a garment, like you would if you just lay a garment down over something. That's how God covered it with water. But yeah, I just think that our God is so awesome. He's so powerful. He's so limitless. And when we think about these things and meditate on these things and allow the Word of God to really paint our minds, it's amazing to see or to experience what God can teach us and can lead us to. And, you know, like Rob said, at the end of the day, we're all searching for a deeper connection with God. We're all looking for a way that we can experience Him more, and also a way that we can help others to experience what we've experienced. I mean, if you're just seeking and seeking and gaining and gaining and gaining and not giving it away, there's something wrong, because that's not how heaven's principles are operated. In every, like in Desire of Ages, she talks about when you look at the oceans, you look at how things are operated. Everything takes to give. The ocean takes all the water from all the lands and all the rivers and all the streams and everything like that. What happens? Then it goes into the atmosphere, it turns into the clouds, and it comes recycled back down and rains again. It takes to give. The Father takes, not the Father, the Son takes everything that the Father has given him, and what does he do? He gives it to us. He gives it to us. All of heaven is given in that principle of taking to give. And so I think that we all want that. We all want to get as much from God as possible, in the sense of our relationship, our security, our connection, and then we want to give that to others as well. So I hope that this has been a blessing. I hope that I haven't said anything that has been too offensive. I hope I've caused you to think a little bit. And again, it's not about being right or being wrong or this or that. We all just want to grow. So I hope that we can discuss some more and that we can all learn together. So let's pray, and then we can move on with the service. Loving Father, I thank you so much for your word. I thank you for this time, for being here with us, for making this planet. You know, we don't understand so many things. There are so many things that are higher than we can ever imagine. But what you have left in your word, what you have revealed to us, we want to understand it to the best of our ability. And so we don't want to overlook or take things lightly, but we just ask that your Spirit would continually work in our hearts, work in our minds, to help us to be able to understand what it is that you have for us at this time, so that we can grow. We know that time is running short. There is not much time left to prepare in any matter, whether it's preparing to go through the crisis or even preparing spiritually for heaven. There's nothing that we can do of our own selves to save ourselves. So, Father, we just humbly submit ourselves to you and just ask for your mercy. We ask that you would bless us on this Sabbath and throughout the rest of this week, that you would forgive us of our sins, continually inspire us each morning when we wake up to meet together with you. Help us to learn what we need to learn for the day. And as men, please, Father, we ask that you would just continue to help us to be lights in our communities, to have an impact in our home. And as we lead our homes, we can lead our communities and lead our society towards you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.